They hadn't spoken in the cab. They barely looked at each other at the airport. And now, as they stood at gate F-26 of Schiphol International, the space between them felt colder than the Dutch spring air outside. Penelope Hayes, 37, former U.S. Air Force combat pilot, now a civilian aviation strategist, wore no uniform today. No medals, no sign of rank. Just a simple black windbreaker, dark jeans, and a passport still warm from security check. Her brother, Mason Hayes, stood beside her in a tailored trench coat that practically screamed legacy. His leather briefcase looked untouched by time, probably because it hadn't carried anything heavier than paperwork in years. They were headed to their father's funeral in New York, and if grief has layers, theirs were buried under years of unspoken battles. The overhead speaker pinged. Flight 726 to New York is now boarding rows 9 through 15. They walked forward, not together, but in parallel lines. Two lives, once bonded by blood, now barely tethered by obligation. They had grown up under the same roof, yes, but Mason always spoke like the house belonged more to him. And maybe it did. He was the chosen one, the one who stayed, who followed their father into the family's legal empire, the golden son, the heir. Penelope chose altitude over inheritance. She joined the Air Force at 21, served across 2 continents, completed Black Ops missions she still couldn't speak about, and came home invisible. To Mason, that choice wasn't bravery, it was betrayal. They boarded together in silence. Row 9, Mason took the aisle seat, of course, without asking. Penelope slid into the window seat. Not that she minded. She preferred distance anyway. The plane filled with passengers, tourists, businessmen, crying toddlers, overworked flight attendants. The world moved on around them. She gazed out the window as Amsterdam's tarmac slowly faded into motion. The plane creaked gently. The engines purred with anticipation. But inside her, something heavier stirred. Not grief exactly, but weight. The kind of weight that doesn't live in your body, but in your silence. That's when Mason leaned toward her just slightly, not to comfort, to sting. Mason had never forgiven her for stepping outside his world. He didn't understand combat protocol, or the kind of leadership that required silence, not speeches. He thought her medals were decoration. She knew they were armor. As the aircraft lifted from the runway, Penelope pressed her head lightly against the window. Clouds swallowed the city below. The sky turned silver. Her father was dead. Her uniform was packed away in a vacuum-sealed bag back in Amsterdam. Her rank didn't matter here. Not on this plane. Not in row 9. She was a passenger now. But the sky? The sky wasn't done with her yet. Mason Hayes didn't just believe in power. He believed it was his birthright. Every room he entered, from boardrooms to courtrooms, seemed to lean in when he spoke. He didn't command with volume. He commanded with posture, with presence. He was the kind of man who wore a wristwatch that cost more than your car, but somehow still made you thank him for showing up. To the world, Mason was brilliant, efficient, unshakable. But to Penelope, he was the brother who had never once accepted her choice to leave. To him, joining the Air Force was a personal betrayal, not just of family legacy, but of his control. While he built arguments in courtrooms, she learned to fly into fire. He called it impulsive. She called it purpose. And neither of them had ever crossed that line to understand the other. Mason liked plans. He liked documents that ended with signatures, lives that followed strategy. And Penelope was none of that. She was risk. She was noise he couldn't quiet. She was freedom he didn't know how to measure. When their father fell ill, Mason took over everything: estate, medical directives, legal logistics. His voice on speakerphone was more common than the nurse's footsteps. And while their father declined, Mason was already rewriting the future to suit his version of it, one that left no room for specter. That's why, long before the engine would explode mid-air, before Penelope would be summoned to the cockpit, Mason had already made his move. He had quietly forwarded her psychological evaluation to the family lawyer. It was buried in a thick military dossier, mostly filled with praise, but one sentence stuck out: potential instability under non-kinetic pressure. He latched onto it like a legal lifeline. To him, it wasn't just a footnote, it was ammunition, something to pull from the drawer when estate matters got complicated, something to remind her, legally and emotionally, that she was never supposed to be trusted. He didn't say it to her face. That wasn't Mason's style. His warfare was ink, claws, and timing. He wasn't trying to ruin her, he was trying to erase her, quietly, surgically, without witnesses. In his mind, that made it cleaner. Smarter. Justified. And it might have worked. But the sky on that one broken day gave Penelope Hayes a different narrative. The plane had begun its slow crawl across the tarmac. Passengers were still settling in, some clicking seatbelts, others fussing with overhead bins. The air was full of soft murmurs, the rustle of newspapers, the distant cough of a toddler. And in row 9, Mason Hayes exhaled just loud enough to be heard. He shifted in his seat with the ease of a man who expected comfort and always received it. Then he turned his head just slightly toward his sister by the window. "You're just a passenger now, Penelope," he said, his tone almost lazy, like it didn't matter, like she didn't matter. Her jaw clenched. She didn't respond. But in that single moment, something sharpened. Not with words, not with fists, with silence. He knew exactly what he was doing. Mason had always known how to weaponize casual cruelty, like a scalpel slipped between ribs without drawing blood. That line, "just a passenger," wasn't just commentary. It was dismissal, a reminder, a calculated strike. It said, "You're not in uniform anymore. You don't fly. You don't lead. You sit, you follow, you obey." And the worst part? To the world around them, it sounded harmless, just an older brother teasing his sister before takeoff. But to Penelope, it was a wound layered atop years of quiet sabotage. She didn't look at him, she didn't flinch. She stared out the window, watching the ground shift under them, pretending the clouds ahead mattered more than his voice behind her. Because Penelope had learned long ago, not all wars are fought with noise. Some are won in silence. And silence today was her armor. Somewhere over the North Atlantic, it happened. A sound tore through the belly of the plane, metal screaming against metal, sudden and alive. The kind of sound you don't hear on commercial flights. The kind that makes every passenger freeze before they even know why. Penelope felt it before she heard it. A vibration, subtle at first, then violent. The floor beneath her feet jolted. The window beside her blurred. Her spine straightened, instinctively, every part of her training kicking in before thought could form. Then came the boom. Not a thud, not a jolt, a boom that cracked across the cabin like thunder inside steel. The right engine had exploded. Flame and smoke spit from the wing outside. The plane rocked hard to the left, then back again like it had been slapped by the sky. Someone screamed, then another. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like snakes hissing and snapping into place. A child wailed behind her. Luggage bins popped open. A coffee cup launched across the aisle. And just 3 feet away, Mason Hayes grabbed the armrest with both hands and froze. Penelope didn't move. Her breath slowed instead of quickening. Her body braced. Her eyes scanned. She didn't look at Mason. She didn't need to, because she knew this wasn't turbulence. This was failure, structural, mechanical, and if it wasn't handled, terminal. The pilot's voice came on over the intercom, crackling and sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. Fasten your..." Then, static. Then, silence. Penelope reached up, took the oxygen mask, pulled it down over her face, and clicked the band behind her head in one motion. Across the aisle, Mason was shaking. He tried to pull his own mask on, but fumbled. His voice cracked. "Pen, what the hell is going on?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet, because something else came through the speakers next. A voice, not meant for the passengers, not part of the script. It was a whisper, and it said one thing: "Get me Spectre. from row 9. The whisper wasn't meant for the cabin. It came over the internal comms, low and crackling. A back-channel transmission routed through the flight deck. Most passengers didn't hear it, caught in panic chaos and the hiss of oxygen masks. But Penelope heard it, every syllable. "Get me Spectre," from row 9. Her pulse didn't spike, her hands didn't tremble, but something inside her shifted, like an old muscle waking up. Like armor that had never really rusted. Spectre. They had called her that once years ago in skies no longer friendly. It wasn't a call sign you earned in training. It was a name whispered after impossible landings, silent kills, and decisions made at Mach speeds under enemy fire. And now, someone up front remembered. Someone needed her. She looked up. Across the aisle, Mason was still panicking, one hand clutching his mask, the other white-knuckled on the seat. He hadn't heard it. He still saw her as nothing, but the cockpit didn't. They didn't need her name. They needed her instinct, her hands, her cold-blooded calm when everything else melted down. She stood. No fanfare, no drama, just one motion. A flight attendant saw her eyes wide with fear, and Penelope said only this: "Tell your captain, Spectre is coming." The attendant blinked, stunned. "You... what?" But she was already walking forward past the screams, past the whimpers, past Mason's stunned silence. Every step erased his words from earlier. "Just a passenger," he'd said. Now the plane itself had said otherwise. The cockpit door hissed shut behind her. It was darker here, quieter, but not calm. The first officer was slumped in his seat, unconscious or worse. Alarms blinked on every panel, red lights screaming in a silent chorus. The captain looked up, sweat streaking down his temple, eyes wild and locked on hers. "You're?" Penelope nodded once. That was all it took. He didn't ask for credentials, didn't care about the years since her last military flight. He just moved aside. She sat down. And just like that, like flipping a switch, something inside her returned. Something sharp, something steel. The civilian world had called it overkill. The Air Force had called it instinct. Now, it was survival. Her hands hovered over the throttle steady. She read the panel like it was a language no one else spoke. Elevator trim gone, rudder sluggish, ailerons failing. The plane was dying by inches, and she could feel every heartbeat of it. Electricals failing, nav systems blind. We're drifting east of Greenland. No military traffic this sector, not on record. Not on record, she repeated, which meant Penelope reached for the auxiliary headset. Plugged into a frequency she hadn't touched in years, a ghost channel, one that had no business still working. NATO Echo 07, this is Spectre. Spectre requesting fallback coordinates and terrain vector, acknowledge. A long pause. Then, Spectre, confirm identity. Last recorded mission, Red Sky, Persia Gulf. Her breath caught. Even now they still remembered. "This is Spectre," she said, voice low measured. "I confirm. Red Sky. Confirm fallback route." Silence. Then static. Then came the words. "Fallback acknowledged. Redirect to abandoned strip grid Kilo 21. Terrain minimal. Approach slope 12 degrees. You've got one shot, Spectre." She blinked. One shot. Just like before. The flight deck was suffocating with heat and blinking chaos. She stepped over the collapsed first officer. He was pale. A shallow pulse. No time. The captain looked up at her. In his eyes, a mixture of relief, fear, and surrender. Systems collapsing, navs dead, hydraulics barely breathing. Penelope didn't speak. She simply pulled the headset over her ears and took the right seat. The seat knew her. Her body aligned before her mind could catch up. Feet to rudder, hands to yoke, fingers to switches. Muscle memory didn't ask questions. It just obeyed. She scanned the panels, everything bleeding red. Altitude falling, fuel dumping from the right wing, auto stabilizers offline. They were flying blind and heavy. Still, she didn't flinch. "Electrical backup?" she asked. "Running on fumes," the captain replied. She toggled the standby systems. A few came alive. Not enough. "I'm rerouting what's left of power to control surfaces and VHF. Kill the galley, kill passenger lighting." The captain hesitated. She turned to him. "I said kill them. We don't need mood lighting. We need a plane that flies." He nodded, switched them off. The cabin dimmed behind them. Then silence. Only the buzz of failing systems, the low wind howl, and their two voices in the dark. Penelope leaned forward. She looked out through the cockpit window. The Atlantic stretched below like black glass. The sun was fading. They were alone, just two pilots and 170 tons of metal bleeding altitude at 30,000 feet. And somehow, she felt calm. Like war. There was no time for pride, no time for rank, for medals, for what she was or wasn't before. This was war. And in war, hesitation killed. Penelope flipped the emergency guard on the comms console. The light blinked red. "Activating NATO emergency band," she said flatly. The captain glanced at her startled. "That's a military frequency. We're a civilian craft." She shot him a look, steel, not words. "Then let them find me later." Her voice went cold, clipped direct. "Echo 07, this is Spectre. Civilian aircraft Delta Bravo 49er, declaring emergency, requesting vector." Repeat, requesting emergency terrain vector. A pause. Then static. Then Spectre. Identity confirmed. What's your current altitude and vector? Penelope checked. 26,000 feet, losing at 500 per minute. One engine out. Second critical. Full avionics degraded. More static. Then came the words, the ones she needed. Spectre. Divert course to NATO emergency strip Kilo 21. Coordinates locked. Terrain minimal. Approach slope 12 degrees. You have less than 18 minutes. She nodded once. No reaction. Just action. Roger that. Diverting. She reached up, clicked off the cabin PA switch, took a breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice clear, calm, impossible to ignore. "This is Penelope Hayes. I'm stepping in as interim flight officer. We've had a critical systems failure. We are attempting an emergency landing." People gasped. Murmurs erupted. A baby cried. But she didn't flinch. She leaned back into her headset. "Get me Kilo 21. Both engines were dead. The aircraft, once a roaring beast of steel, was now a silent leviathan. No thrust, no power, just momentum, gravity, and one woman's will. At 25,000 feet, physics became God. Penelope adjusted the pitch. Tiny, deliberate movements. Too much, and they'd stall. Too little, and they'd drop like a stone. "Glide ratio," she barked. 17-1, the captain answered. That gave them 80, maybe 90 miles. If they played it perfectly. She exhaled slowly. "Trim nose down 2 degrees. Maintain descent rate. Watch your angle of attack." The yoke pushed back like it didn't want to obey her. She gripped tighter. She whispered to it like it was a wild animal. "Come on, girl, we've flown worse." Behind her, the cabin was silent. 200 souls not breathing, only hoping. The plane creaked like a dying ship. Every gust of wind became a shove. Every dip of the nose felt like falling into death. Penelope locked her elbows, blocked out everything but the math. Speed, drag, angle, lift. It wasn't courage now. It was geometry in motion. One wrong vector and the Atlantic would write their names in the cold. Still, her hands didn't shake, because she wasn't guessing. She knew the math. She was the math. The cockpit dimmed with dusk, altitude dropping, systems fading, and Penelope's mind, just for a second, slipped. Not from fear, but from memory. She saw it clearly. The file, the folder, stamped in red, Hayes Penelope. Recommendation, non-combat clearance. Emotional volatility under pressure. That wasn't a diagnosis, it was a label. A scar branded into her record after one moment of grief, a moment the military never forgave. A tear shed during a debrief, a scream in a tent after watching 3 teammates die in smoke and fire. She buried it deeper than war itself. And now, it had surfaced again, not because she failed, but because someone wanted her to fail. Mason. He'd found the report, and when her name hit the news as a potential instructor, he leaked it. To protect the family name, he'd said, to stop spectacles in uniform. But truth was simpler. He hated being the weaker Hayes. Penelope's jaw tightened. The plane trembled. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking, not like the report claimed. She wasn't volatile. She was calm, dead calm. Because even ghosts didn't scare her anymore. Only betrayal did. Penelope had seen the clause once, tucked deep inside a trust agreement she never signed. 3 sentences, written in perfect legalese. In the event of psychological instability, as determined by military or psychiatric review, the beneficiary's eligibility may be reassessed. Reassessed, a pretty word for erased. Mason's fingerprints were all over it. He was a lawyer, of course. But more than that, he was a strategist, a coward with a pen. He didn't need to discredit her to her face. He just needed her diagnosis to do it for him. And it had worked. The moment that report surfaced, the board froze her inheritance. Not revoked. No Mason was smarter than that. He made sure it looked fair. Pending investigation, pending review, pending everything. Penelope remembered her silence in that room. How Mason smiled politely while the family attorney delivered the blow. How he reached for her hand with fake compassion, saying, "It's just a formality. We all want what's best for you." He made betrayal look like concern. He turned ink into exile. And now he sat just 10 feet behind her, quiet, safe, selfish, while she tried to land a dying aircraft with 200 lives inside. Legal betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It just needed paper. And someone willing to sign her name away. Penelope never shouted. She never begged. She documented. Every look Mason gave her, every pause before a lie, every time someone said, "It's for your own good." Her notebook wasn't a diary. It was a map of betrayal. She wrote with surgical precision. No emotion, no revenge. Only truth, line by line, like loading bullets into a quiet legal gun. When the lawyer read that clause aloud, she didn't cry. She wrote, "Clause 7.3 cited. Triggered by unofficial report. No second opinion requested." When Mason smiled and reached for her hand, she noted, "Touch as theater. Eye contact equals rehearsed." Every sentence she wrote had weight, because she knew people forget what they said, but ink doesn't. She wasn't collecting evidence for a courtroom. She was arming herself with clarity. In a family that weaponized silence, Penelope turned observation into armor. And while others played games with legacy and money, she played the long game, where memory proof and precision always win. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And every page was a warning no one saw coming. At 31,000 feet, the last engine coughed, then died. No warning, no drama. Just silence. A silence so loud it filled the entire cabin. Then the drop. Passengers screamed, trays flew, the lights flickered like a dying heartbeat. Inside the cockpit, Penelope didn't panic. She tightened her grip on the control yoke, eyes scanning, muscles remembering, instincts taking over. This wasn't a plane anymore. It was a 170-ton glider falling fast with 211 souls on board, and she was the only thing between them and oblivion. "Hydraulics are unstable," she muttered. "Backup systems, flickering. We've got 5 minutes of partial control, if that." She glanced out the window. Clouds, ice, miles of open death. No power meant no climb, no restart. Only one option: glide. She needed a flat angle, a long stretch of land, a miracle. She took a breath, not out of fear, but out of focus. Every decision from here on out wasn't just life or death. It was how they died, screaming or silent, whole or in pieces. And Penelope Hayes refused to let this story end in wreckage. She was no longer a pilot. She was a nerve system, stretched, burning alive. Every shift in her wrist became a whisper to the wings. Every breath was math muscle memory. The aircraft didn't listen to instruments anymore. They were dead. The only thing responding now was gravity. Penelope gritted her teeth and pulled gently left. The plane tilted. Too much. She eased back. She was flying by feel, like a violinist with no strings, a surgeon with no monitor, a warrior with no backup. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple. She didn't wipe it. She couldn't. One hand nudged the yoke. The other adjusted the trim tab. There was no room for error. One twitch, they spiral. One miscalculation, they stall. She whispered to herself, "Fly the plane. Just fly the damn plane." Outside, the clouds opened. She saw it, a flat patch of earth. Maybe an old NATO airstrip. Maybe just hope in disguise. She had no flaps, no reverse thrusters, no second chance. She only had one thing: herself. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Brace. It was the only word Penelope spoke aloud. Her voice cut through the cockpit like steel. Passengers heard it over the intercom. Children clutched their parents. An old man whispered a prayer. But Penelope's eyes were dry, her hands steady. The altimeter ticked down. 500 feet, 300, 180, no gear lock, no flaps, no time. She made a call. Nose down first. A pilot's last resort, forcing the front wheels to touch first, hoping the force would slam the rear gear into place. High risk. One wrong angle, they cartwheel into fire. The earth rushed up like a tidal wave of dirt and final chances. She whispered, "Just hold." The impact came like a cannon blast. Sparks. Rubber shrieked. The metal screamed like it remembered war. Smoke filled the cabin. Luggage tore loose. People cried. One passed out. And then, stillness. Outside the cockpit, the plane sat bent and battered, just 40 feet from a wall of trees. Not a single fatality. Penelope let out a breath, her first in 43 seconds. Her hands were shaking now, but she kept them on the yoke, not out of fear, out of duty. The black boxes were pulled. The media storm hit within hours. FAA, NTSB, NATO, all scrambling to find what happened, who saved the plane, and why it almost didn't make it. Penelope Hayes didn't speak to reporters. She declined interviews. She filed a sterile, clean report, pilot actions damage logs, airspeed data. But nowhere in the paperwork was mention of the 4 seconds. 4 seconds when she froze. 4 seconds where her hand hovered over the yoke and didn't move. No one noticed. Not the passengers, not the flight deck, not even the flight data recorder. A glitch masked it. But she remembered every millisecond. She heard her brother's voice echoing again. "You're just a passenger now." For 4 seconds, she believed him, and that belief nearly cost them all. Penelope didn't cry. She didn't confess. But every night since, she replayed it, those 4 seconds, and whispered to herself, "Never again." The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the walls. The air smelled like varnish, fear, and microphones. Mason Hayes adjusted his tie, but his hands shook. He had been subpoenaed to testify in the aviation inquiry, but what he delivered was something else entirely. He cleared his throat. "I have something to say." The judge raised an eyebrow. Even Penelope turned, slightly, not in anger, not in hope, just curiosity. Mason inhaled hard. Then it came. Not a lawyer's script, not a rehearsed statement, a confession. I was jealous of everything she was, of her medals, her service, her silence. I called her unstable because I was unstable. I tried to strip her from the will, from the family, because I couldn't stand living in her shadow. He looked down at his hands like they'd betrayed him too. I thought if I buried her, I'd finally be seen. The room fell silent. Even the stenographer paused typing. Then Mason said something no one expected. I never thought she'd still save us. Not after everything I did. His voice broke. And for the first time in his life, Mason Hayes bowed his head, not in shame, but in surrender. The courtroom had emptied. The verdicts, the claps, the murmurs, all gone. Only two remained. Penelope Hayes standing still in her uniform blazer. Mason Hayes sitting with hands clasped, eyes swollen. She didn't sit beside him. She didn't touch him. But she spoke. I heard every word you said in there, she began, voice low. And maybe, 5 years ago, I would have wanted that. The truth. The apology. Mason looked up, but she didn't meet his eyes. I want you to know, she continued, I didn't land that plane to prove anything, not to the FAA, not to the media, not even to you. She paused. I landed it because that's who I am. That's who I've always been, long before you decided what I'm worth. Silence. Then she inhaled and released something far heavier than air. I forgive you. The words were soft, but they cracked something ancient between them. Mason opened his mouth to speak. She raised a hand, gently. But don't confuse this, she said, finally turning toward him. This isn't for you. Her voice firmed. It's for me, so I can walk out of this room and not carry your shame with me anymore. She turned, walked to the doors, and didn't look back. Forgiveness didn't make her weak. It made her weightless. It had been 3 years. Penelope Hayes stood at the edge of a sleek simulator room watching cadets in flight suits tap away at controls. She wasn't in uniform, no medals, no ceremony, just a black blazer, clipboard, and that unmistakable poise of someone who danced with death and lived to teach about it. The instructor nodded. Last one, Hayes. He's special. A young man stepped into the room. Slim, tall, nervous, eyes like someone searching for something. He paused, looked at her, and smiled softly. You probably don't remember me, he said. She studied his face. Try me. Row 23F. I was 10. You told the flight attendant to hold my hand. Silence. Then it hit her like gravity. The boy with the tear-streaked cheeks, who whispered, Are we going to die? She had looked him in the eye and said, Not today. He nodded now, voice firmer. I'm here because I saw you didn't give up. Not when the plane shook, not when the fire started, not when people screamed. You didn't panic. You flew. He stood taller. I want to learn because of that, because I saw what strength looks like when it's silent. Penelope didn't smile, but her eyes softened. No applause, no headlines, just one soul, choosing courage over fear. That was the real legacy. And in that moment, she knew her story had taken flight again. Penelope never returned to the Air Force, not because she was afraid, not because they didn't want her back, but because she understood something deeper now, that survival isn't just about systems and checklists. It's about stillness when others scream. It's about breathing when your body wants to freeze. It's about making decisions when there's no time to think. At the Civilian Emergency Flight Academy, cadets called her ma'am, but behind her back, they used the name the sky had given her, Spectre. She didn't teach from textbooks. She taught from scars, from that night over the Atlantic. From the moment when gravity turned a machine into a coffin and she refused to let anyone be buried. She taught how to listen to the engine's rhythm like a heartbeat, how to read silence as a scream, how to trust your gut when the screens go black. Cadets didn't just leave with flight hours. They left with something far rarer, the courage to fly even when the manual runs out, Because Spectre didn't teach how to fly planes. She taught how to fly through chaos. The classroom was empty. The simulator was silent. And Penelope Hayes sat alone with the morning sun filtering through the tall windows of the training center. Her flight logbook, the one she had carried since her first combat mission, rested open in her lap. Its pages were stained with years of turbulence, ink-blots of night shifts, and the pressure of decisions made in seconds. She turned to the final page, paused. Then, in crisp black pen, she wrote, "Teach them 0 seconds." No explanation. No lecture. Just that. 0 seconds the moment, before the engine dies, before panic spreads, before you know what to do. That's where courage lives. She gently closed the book. Not slammed, not locked away, just closed. She stood, took one last look at the sky outside, pale gold spilling behind drifting clouds. She didn't cry, she didn't salute, she just walked away. The book stayed on the desk, waiting for the next soul brave enough to open it. In the chaos of life, not everyone gets a warning. You won't always have time to plan, to think, or even to breathe. And when that moment comes, it won't be your title, your resume, or your followers that save you. It will be your calm, your discipline, your choice to stand tall when the world drops out from under you. Penelope Hayes wasn't a hero because she wore a uniform. She became one the moment she chose courage over comfort. So ask yourself, what will you do in your 0 seconds if this story made your heart race? If it reminded you that heroes don't always shout, sometimes they fly in silence, hit that subscribe button, not just to follow a channel, but to stand with stories that remind us what we're truly capable of, because out there, someone else is flying blind, and your click might be the beacon they need.